Pivot Table Basic course. From here on out, we're going to use the sample data that you see in front of you. If you haven't already downloaded the sample data for this course, you can download it now. It's in the lecture notes for this particular lesson. So with the previous lessons, we understood how to structure our data if it wasn't already in a good structure. But a lot of times you'll actually have information that is in a good structure. And with this sample data, it's already in a good format, so we don't have to change it at all. So let's have a look to get a better understanding of the data that we'll be using throughout the course. The idea behind this data is that we work for some sort of car company that manages dealerships across different regions. The dealerships that this company manages sells Subarus and Toyotas and different models within those makes. There are 4 regions that we operate in: North, East, South, and West. And this particular data set is a dump from our sales database. So like I said, this is just sample data, but all of the information that we have here will give us a really good foundation to learn all the different features and functions of pivot tables. And as we go through the course, we'll keep using this same data so that you can get really comfortable with it and familiar with it. And then we can actually focus on learning the different features and tools within pivot tables. Awesome, so let's get into it. The first column we have in our data set, or the first field, is purchase date. This just represents the date that the vehicle was purchased by the customer. The region represents the region in which that sale took place. The sales rep is the sales rep that was responsible for that sale, so they get credit for that sale. The make of the vehicle that was sold. The model of the vehicle that was sold. The purchase price, so what the customer paid for it, or the sales amount that we received from it. And the final field is the unit cost of that vehicle, so how much the dealership paid for it before they sold it. In this lesson, we're just going to create a really basic pivot table. We're going to figure out what our total sales amount was across all of our different regions. So we can just click anywhere in our data set, go to Insert, and on the far left side, you'll see Pivot Table. We can select Pivot Table, and the first option we're presented with is to choose the data that you want to analyze. Generally, Excel will pick up the correct data set that you want to use in your pivot table. If it's not, you can always select your own range manually. The next option that we're presented with is where we want to place the pivot table report. So we can put it in a new worksheet, or we can put it in an existing worksheet. I generally put it in a new worksheet. It just gives me a nice clean space and a lot of room to work with. So I'll just select OK, and Excel will create a new sheet, and it'll put a pivot table in that sheet. It'll automatically name this pivot table Pivot Table 1, and the more pivot tables I create, it'll just auto increment that number. So I'll have Pivot Table 2, Pivot Table 3, etc. Over on the right hand side, you'll also see Pivot Table fields. And here we have all the different fields that we went through earlier. And below our fields, we have our pivot table areas. There's 4 areas that you can place information on a pivot table, and each one gives you a little bit different functionality. We have filters, columns, rows, and values. I'll start with the values area because that's where you'll always place information. You generally won't get any benefit from a pivot table without placing something in the values space. So the values area is where you want to place information that you want to aggregate. So earlier we want to identify the total sales amount of all our different regions. So the first thing we can do is take our purchase price field, which holds the sales amount, drag it into our values area, and the pivot table will sum all of the values that sit within our purchase price field. And in order to see it by region, all I have to do is drag region into my columns or my rows. I generally start out with rows. I just find it a bit more visually appealing. But once you put information into your rows area, it will create a new row for each unique value within your data set. So we know that we have 4 regions, North, East, South, and West, and it will simply group our information, so our purchase price amount, by our 4 regions. Pretty straightforward and pretty intuitive. We can also put it into our columns space. So if you put it into your columns, it will create a new column for each unique value in your data set. Columns and rows work very much in the same way. The other place you can put your information is in your filters area. The filters area creates a new area a little bit outside your pivot table that allows you to filter information. So here we've got a filter value for each of our unique values in our data set for our regions, north, east, south, and west, and you can simply select a region that you want to filter the information by. You also have the option to select multiple items. So you could select the north and the west region, and it would show you the total purchase price for those two selected values. I'll select all of my regions and move them back into the rows. So there we go. That's how we create a basic pivot table in Excel off of data that's set up in the correct fashion. And if you haven't used pivot tables before, hopefully that's a bit of an eye-opener. They're really easy to use, they're really intuitive, and they're really quick. In the next lessons, we'll dive into a few other features of pivot tables that you'll want to take advantage of if you're just starting out.